Okay, it's a couple minutes after 1 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to another online learning program with the Jewish Women's Archive. My name is Larissa. I am the program manager here at JWA. Before we officially get started and I tell you a little bit more about JWA and then introduce our teacher for today and our topic, just a few technical things to go over that you can see on the slide. As you can see with the different icons, you can adjust your volume. And also you should feel free to enable your microphone and your video if you would like. Today's program will be very participatory, but you can participate in a couple different ways. Again, you can turn on your mic and your camera and speak. You are also welcome to participate simply by typing into the chat box. Either way is fine. If you would like to take part in the discussion by actually speaking, please use the hand raising icon. That's the icon that's the very last one on the slide, and it's toward the top of your screen, and then we will call on you. Oh, and also when you are not speaking, please mute your microphone. So if you simply click on the microphone icon, you'll see a line go through it, and that means that you're muted. That will help us cut down on background noise. So just for anyone who is unfamiliar with the Jewish Women's Archive, I'll just tell you a few things. We are a national nonprofit dedicated to making known the stories, struggles, and achievements of Jewish women in North America and beyond. On our site, you'll find the world's largest repository of materials about and voices of Jewish women. As you'll see here, our mission is to document Jewish women's stories, elevate their voices, and inspire them to be agents of change. So it's not just about documenting these stories, it's also about promoting them and showing their value to the public. And we do that through things like our profiles and encyclopedia, curricula for educators, and online exhibits, as well as things like our podcast, our blog, our book club, and even some fun quizzes. I want to thank you all for being here today and for demonstrating your interest in Jewish women's stories. We really couldn't do what we do without wonderful people like you who consume and support our work. So thank you for being here. So again, welcome. Today's program is entitled The First Woman Rabbi, Uncovering the Story of Regina Jonas. And I am really pleased to introduce our teacher for today, who is our Rabbinic intern, Sarah Mulhern. So Sarah has developed some really wonderful resources on our site about Regina Jonas that people can use to bring this story into their own communities. And I really hope that you will enjoy engaging with some of these materials today as you learn more about Rabbi Jonas. So with that, I am going to hand the baton over to Sarah.
Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to dig into this learning with you guys. So as Larissa said, I'm Sarah. I'm the Rabbinic intern at Jewish Women's Archive, and I do a number of different projects here having to do with the stories of women in the rabbinate. And one of the things that I've had the opportunity to dig into, and it's really been a real inspiration and privilege, is to learn a little bit more about Rabbi Regina Jonas, the first woman that we know of to have ever been ordained as a rabbi in history. And I am hoping today to be able to share with you a little bit about her and who she was and why I find her so inspiring and important. So just to give you a sense of where we're going, so we're going to first spend some time together just learning about Rabbi Regina Jonas, about her incredible life, and about the legacy of her story. And
until about 2 o'clock.
About the legacy of her story and why it isn't as well known as I think it deserves to be. Then we're going to spend a little time talking and thinking together about the implications of her story. I think there's a lot of lessons for our communities and for our work now that we can draw out of her life, and also that we can draw out of the story of the loss of her story and why it became so silenced. And then we'll take a big step back and we'll spend the last sort of chunk of our time together making sure that you are all empowered to run a session or to teach about Rabbi Regina Jonas in your own communities if you would like to. I'll give you a little bit of a sense of some of the resources we have on our website that would make you empowered to do this teaching, whether we've timed this webinar to be in preparation if you're looking for something to teach around the Holocaust for Yom HaShoah, so whether around that or any time of year that you will have everything you need at your fingertips to teach about this important Jewish woman. So without any further ado, let's jump in and talk a little bit about who was Regina Jonas. So we don't know that much about her childhood. She was born in 1902 in Berlin. We do know that she was born to a very traditional Jewish family and that she lived in a neighborhood that was known to be very Jewish and also relatively poor, something like the Lower East Side of Berlin. We know that her father died when she was 11 years old and that under her mother's supervision, she continued to be a regular participant in their Orthodox synagogue. We know she had actually a weekly chavruta, a weekly study session with her rabbi up until the time that he left Berlin during the war. We know that she was enrolled in Jewish schools and that she excelled there. But actually the most interesting thing that we know about Regina, and I want to sort of highlight this as one of the big enduring questions about her, is that we know from people who went to school with her that even as early as junior high school, she was already talking about becoming a rabbi. So one of my big questions as someone who spent a lot of time studying her remains, how did she know when there had literally never been another female rabbi in the world? How did she know that she could become a female rabbi, that she could become a rabbi? How did she imagine that for herself? So that I will leave as an enduring question. But after she graduated high school, she did a teacher training course and she began teaching in a Jewish school. And her life sort of proceeded in the way that you might have expected until something radical and revolutionary happened. In 1924, she entered the Hochschule, which is the sort of premier academy of Jewish studies in Germany, and also the one of the liberal German rabbinical seminaries. And there were female students at the Hochschule when she entered, but they were all in teacher training programs. And she did not enter into the teaching training program. She actually entered with the permission of the dean of the rabbinical school and with the public understanding that she was there to study to become a rabbi. And so obviously she was the only female student, but alongside her male colleagues, she learned the full curriculum that male students learned in order to become rabbis. And she also wrote a thesis, which rabbinical students did in this program. And she actually wrote on the topic of women becoming rabbis, maybe unsurprisingly. And one thing that's really interesting about her thesis is that she didn't write from a sort of liberal perspective of saying, like, it used to be that the rule was that women couldn't be rabbis, but now we've entered modernity, we're going to do something different. Actually, the whole trajectory of her thesis was to try and prove within the traditional Jewish texts that it is permissible for a woman to become a rabbi. So she's analyzing Talmudic texts and biblical texts and showing that she believes and she argues within the tradition that women are qualified to become rabbis. Very powerful stuff. So she completed the program, and then disaster struck. Just as she finished, she had already had her dissertation approved. The dean of the rabbinical school who had approved the idea of ordaining a woman passed away suddenly. And his replacement, Professor Hanoch Albeck, refused to ordain her. So even though she had done all of the programs of studies alongside her male colleagues, when she graduated with a teacher's certificate and not with rabbinic ordination because of this last-minute change of leadership in the school and their refusal to ordain her. And I would imagine for myself, if something like that happened, that really could have been the end of the road. I can't imagine something more frustrating than getting all the way to the end of your degree and then having it refused to you. But this incredible woman, nevertheless, she persisted, as we've been saying these days, and she actually didn't give up on the idea of becoming a rabbi. She continued to teach in the Jewish schools, but she continued to pursue the idea of rabbinic ordination. And finally, in 1935, she was given private ordination personally from a rabbi who was the head, from Rabbi Max Steinman, who was the head of the liberal rabbinic organization in Germany. And he certified that she had all the knowledge and that she was now considered a rabbi. But that was not the end of the challenges she faced. Even now that she was an ordained rabbi, she could not find a pulpit that was willing to hire a woman. So she continued to teach in the German Jewish school system, which was actually a fascinating and very important place for her to be, because in 1933, as many people may know, German Jewish students were expelled from the public school system. And so in the period when she was teaching there, the Jewish school system was absolutely flooded with many, many Jewish students who might not normally have gone to Jewish schools. And those who remember her from that time remember her as facing that challenge as a remarkably positive and beloved teacher. And she continued that work for a number of years. And then in 1937, the community actually, they still wouldn't place her in a pulpit, but the official Jewish community of Berlin hired her to be what they called a pastoral rabbinic counselor, basically a chaplain. And so in addition to her teaching in the Jewish high school, she became the chaplain, the Jewish chaplain of the hospital and the Jewish aged home. And we have in the papers and records that we have of her some really beautiful and moving letters from younger folks who had mostly at this point fled Germany, but whose parents were still behind, either in the hospital or in the elder care facility, thanking Rabbi Jonas for her incredible pastoral care to their parents. So she continued to do this incredible work at a very challenging point in time, because as the 30s became the 40s, increasingly the rabbis who had been filling the pulpits of Berlin and of Germany either fled the country or were deported to the camps. And as there became fewer and fewer and fewer rabbis, there became more opportunities and more of a desperate need for Regina to step into rabbinic roles. So it was in this period in the early 40s that she was able actually to preach in synagogues and to officiate services in synagogues. And in fact, the German community delegated her to go and be the sort of visiting rabbi in the many German cities that were left entirely without a rabbi. So the second enduring question that I sort of want to highlight about the life of Regina Jonas is what would have been if the war had never happened? And obviously it's a sort of unfair and terrifying question, but in one way she was able to emerge and sort of barriers and misogyny that was stopping her fell away, in part because it was such a desperate time that someone so talented and so passionate couldn't be overlooked in a way that she might have in another period. On the other hand, of course, we're left with the question of what such a talented and passionate person would have done had the war not come and cut her work short. So I will thank you, Ellen, for your message. I will speak a little slower. She continued her work until 1942, when Regina Jonas was deported to Theresienstadt, to Terezin, which is in what is now the Czech Republic. And even there, as an inmate in the camp, she continued to work and to serve as a rabbi. She worked with the well-known psychologist Viktor Frankl to make a sort of psychological support system for the camp. One of the things that she was known to do was go and meet the trains as they came in to offer support to the new inmates as they struggled to adjust to this horrible new point in their lives. She was known to give lectures all around in the camp community, and we have a list of topics of the lectures she gave on all sorts of things that rabbis speak about, women in the Bible, Jewish holidays, and also topics specific to the situation of being in a concentration camp, Judaism and suffering, God and suffering. And I think for me, it's very inspiring to imagine that even in this incredibly dark time of being an inmate in a concentration camp during World War II, she also saw that as a calling to serve the Jews of that community and to serve as a rabbi. As you will not be surprised to hear, the story has a sad ending. In 1944, Rabbi Regina Jonas was deported to Auschwitz. And unfortunately, we don't have good records, but the supposition is that she was killed upon her arrival there. So I give that just as an overview of some of the sort of major points of a really amazing and tragically shortened life. And I hope that you'll see that, to me, it's a very important story on a lot of different levels. It's an important story about women's leadership. It's an important story about the Holocaust and an inspiring story about the Holocaust. And it's an important story to think about the evolution of women in the rabbinate. I'll pause there for a second and see if there are any questions or comments before we move forward. Great. So I highlighted a couple of what I called enduring questions about the life of Regina Jonas. How did she know that she could become a rabbi? How did she find the strength, even when her ordination was denied, to continue her studies and eventually become a rabbi? What parts of her life, what would have been different if we would have, if she wouldn't have faced the untimely loss that she did? A lot of mysteries about her life. But the biggest mystery in some ways is the fact that nobody knew about Regina Jonas. I'll say personally that when I started rabbinical school, and again, I'm a woman learning to be a rabbi, I believe that the first woman in history to be ordained was Sally Priesand in 1972. And I was not alone. That was what I think is what most people think. And in fact, if you look at the press records and all of the hullabaloo that happened in 1972 when Sally was ordained from the Hebrew Union College, the Reform Rabbinical Seminary in America, they all say the first woman rabbi in all of world history. So how did that happen? What made it possible for the story that is not that old, right, that happened just a few decades earlier, to be completely lost to such an extent that even people who were becoming women rabbis didn't know about this role model? So I'm going to just toss out a few of my own suggestions, but it's really very much an open question. One part of the answer is that the Cold War happened. Rabbi Regina Jonas was very prescient. She left her papers behind in the Berlin Jewish community's archive before she was deported to the camp. I think she had a sense of the importance of her role in history. But because of the vagaries of the Cold War, that archive ended up on the East Berlin side of. And so for decades, historians and especially Western American Jews had no access to any of those materials. Part of the answer is the Holocaust, right? Many of us are aware that for decades, many survivors did not feel comfortable talking about their experiences in the camp, did not feel comfortable talking about their lives before the war. And so there was sort of, for many years, a blanket of silence in general over many of the important stories of the Holocaust. And so this, in some ways, was lost alongside many, many other stories for that reason. But I want to point to two other reasons that are a little more maybe political. I think one reason why we don't talk about Regina Jonas is because she doesn't neatly fit into our narrative of women becoming rabbis. There's a feeling that women becoming rabbis is something that we innovated in America, and that it's very much a part of women's lib, second wave feminism. And that's true. It is true that the women's liberation movement and incredible work that was happening among American feminists in the 1970s and before that in the 60s and 50s, laying the groundwork, is what made it possible for American women to become rabbis. But because Regina Jonas, being the first woman rabbi, didn't really fit into that story, she often got relegated to a side note. And, oh, there was this weird thing before, but that's not really a part of it. Whereas actually, now that we're discovering her, we can draw lines of continuity between feminist movements in America and feminist movements in Europe, and women, American women rabbis, but of any person can actually turn to this story for more inspiration and for more grounding. But for some ways of telling the story, it was inconvenient. And finally, I can't help but think that her gender was a big part of why her story was lost. Regina Jonas went to school with other men who survived the war, who came to America, who had rabbinic careers in America. Many of her professors survived the war and came to America. Viktor Frankl and others who worked alongside her in Terezin survived the war and came to America. So why didn't they talk about her? And how much of the fact that they didn't talk about her was because nobody really knew how to think about her as a female rabbi. Questions or comments at this point about the idea of her story and how it was lost?
Looks like we have a couple questions
Great.
in the box.
Bernice, you were asking about the dissertation and where it can be found. It has been translated into English and published as a book. And I believe you can find it on Amazon or in your local library. and it is well worth reading. It is really, really fascinating and provocative. And Ellen, you asked where she did the dissertation. So she did the dissertation at the Hochschule, the School for the Scientific Study of Judaism. I'm not going to attempt the German because you'll all laugh at me. At the same place where she was doing her rabbinic ordination. Other questions about Regina's life or about how her story was lost? Karen, I see you're typing a question, so I'll give you a moment. Oh, great. So Karen has found the link here. So if you go to Amazon, it's right there, and you can buy the book. Great. Yes. There is also a graphic novel about her life, which is, I'm glad, Karen, I was going to point that out at the end. It's a great teaching tool, especially if you're working with more visually oriented students. It's a great way to teach about her. Karen asked whether she was referenced by Viktor Frankl. So this is one of the sort of heartbreaking parts of the story. We have testimonies from survivors who talked about them working together and talked about her working in his program. I have not been able to find any direct references in his writing to her or anything where he talked about her. And similarly for another number of other prominent German Jewish rabbis who either taught her in seminary or studied alongside her, none of them seemed to want to tell her story or to be able to tell her story. Jenny asked about the problem of private ordination. Yeah, so it's interesting, right? She did the full seminary program to receive the sort of institutional ordination, and that fell apart at the very end, as I talked about. And then in the end, she was able to get this personal ordination, and it was sort of a strange political compromise because it was a personal ordination, but it was given by the head of the rabbinic organization or association. So it was sort of like he was doing it privately, but he was also the president of the whole association, so there is a certain amount of public recognition there. It wasn't a secret. She wrote a public letter certifying her ordination, and it was known publicly that she had been ordained. So it wasn't one of these, some of us may know of, like a secret ordinations that sometimes happened. But he was sort of trying to walk a political line, and others were trying to walk a political line, and so it was emphasized that it was his private ordination as opposed to the organization or the institutional ordination. And we can see that that played out in her career, that sometimes she was full-heartedly accepted as a rabbi, and sometimes either because of the nature of her ordination or because of the nature of her gender, it wasn't so clear that she was. I'm just waiting because I see there are a few more questions coming. Right, so Bernice asked whether this is similar to the situation with Avi Weiss and Rabbi Sarah Horowitz. And I think it's a great parallel, right? Rabbi Horowitz also has private ordination from Avi Weiss, known publicly, but from him personally. And I think she would be the first to talk about the ways in which that has created opportunities and challenges different than the ones her students face coming out of Yeshivat Maharat, who have an institutional ordination. And since, Bernice, since you're mentioning that, I want to encourage folks to, if you go to our website, to jwa.org/rabbis, you'll see a number of interviews we've launched with female rabbis, including Rabbi Sarah Horowitz, talking about some of these issues. And there's some interesting archival footage there where Rabbi Sarah reflects specifically on that question. Jenny says that sometimes in Europe, male rabbis needed a private endorsement from more than one rabbi to be accepted fully. I think that's a very good point, right? What does it mean that it was only one person? And Karen asked about the documentary. So I'm going to take that as a bridge to move into exactly that. So we talked a little bit about how Regina Jonas's story was lost, and part of the reason that that is becoming in some ways a little bit less true and she's becoming somewhat well known is because of the work of JWA over the past 5 years to really try and get her story out there. And one of the things that has happened in that work is that in 2014, a group of women rabbis, pioneering women rabbis and scholars, including the first woman rabbi in each denomination, traveled to Europe to sort of learn more about her, to see her papers, and they made what I think is a really beautiful 10-minute award-winning short documentary about that journey. So it is available on our website, and you can show it to your students. And what I want to do now is actually watch it together, because I think it gives a little bit more context to the importance of this story. So let's watch that together. But before we do, I want to offer, Lystra, can we just go back? I want to just offer a couple of questions to think about as you watch the video. So some things to think of in mind. How does Rabbi Jonas and other historical figures inspire us, and what can we learn from them? What might be different for us and for our communities because we didn't know about Regina Jonas and others maybe like her? And what does it mean for us now to find out about Regina Jonas? What does it mean now that we know her story? And what can that mean for us in our communities? So with that, let's watch this documentary rather than just talking about it, and we'll have some chance to reflect afterwards.
And I just want to note real quick, you are able to adjust the volume on your own computer.
Regina Jonas had the passion and the desire to become a rabbi when it was completely new. She faced a lot of antagonism. She had no role models. They were all men, and yet there was something inside of her that moved her forward.
People made such a fuss about us of how did you possibly imagine that you could be a rabbi, and it wasn't possible. So now that I learned that she was born in 1902 and as an 11-year-old discerned that she was supposed to be a rabbi in 1913 in Germany. What an absolutely remarkable story, regardless of the rest of the story.
I think one of the great gifts of feminism is discovering all these stories that have been hidden away for so long. And Regina Jonas is one of those people we should have known about.
And here she lived when she was already officiating as a teacher and preacher, a rabbinical.
I think Regina Jonas changes how we think about Jewish history to recognize that the first woman who became a rabbi here in Berlin in December of 1935. It shifts the kind of narrative that we tell about feminism. It makes the post-war feminist movement, which we associate very much with the United States, actually to have roots that go back further.
This is it. This is her whole life in a box.
I think the most powerful moment for me was when we were with the archivist and you could see Regina Jonas' papers. And there weren't very many of them. But in some sense, it appears that she chose those papers. So in a way, she was creating how she wanted to be remembered.
And I told before that we don't know exactly how these papers got here. We think she gave them to the Jewish community before she was sent to Theresienstadt, so about in 1942. And then
we just have a fragment. We only have a fragment. But how wonderful that we do have that fragment.
We have the original ordination that letter, so to speak. And Leo Beck signs it, not signing the smicha, but signing that it's a true copy. Which means he was doing some political, I think, some political balancing. He was the head of all of German Jewry, so he couldn't say, you know, I'm in 35. This would have been problematic, but he took that step as far as he could. Nobody knowing about her, even though Leo Beck knew her and survived, and many other people knew her and survived, didn't talk about her. So this is kind of the weird...
For many of us, that's really the question.
Right, right. Silencing women. For me, it's writing women out of history.
It's an evening of firsts in which we honor Regina Jonas, the first woman rabbi in modern times, and bring together for the very first time the pioneering rabbis who were the first to be ordained by their denominational seminaries.
I was always pleased that I wasn't really first, because I never wanted to be. So I knew that maybe there was a woman who had some form of ordination. We weren't sure of her name even, but the rumor was there.
I do a lot of speaking, and I always try to mention her, feeling that whenever we gather to talk about these kinds of subjects, we bring honor to her memory.
So many pilgrimages up mountains. Now at Terezin with Regina, a different pilgrimage on sanctified ground.
She was the pastor. She was the teacher. She was their rabbi. And to be in that place with other women rabbis, which are her legacy, was quite powerful to me.
This is from an article that she wrote in 1938. God has placed abilities and callings in our hearts without regard to gender. Thus, each of us has the duty, whether man or woman, to realize those gifts God has given. If you look at things this way, one takes woman and man for what they are, human beings.
The texts that she was looking at were the same texts that I had been thinking about in terms of finding support for female rabbis.
I believe that the question of whether a woman may make halachic decisions as a rabbinerin may very clearly be seen as permitted, and it is not necessary to continue to linger over this matter.
For a second, it was, could I have done what she did? No, I don't think I could have done what she did, but for a moment I had a glimpse of it because I was speaking her words.
The words on the plaque that come from one of her sermons that have somehow miraculously survived. To live that kind of a life, I think, makes her a symbol for all humanity.
It's a little bit like reconnecting with a long-lost relative, older relative that I always should have known, who's part of my story, whom I had never even known about.
She ministered to people at a time of such grave crisis and inhumanity, and yet she not only kept her own spirits and faith going, she kept the faith going of those who were imprisoned there. That's what a rabbi does, is to try and offer hope in the darkest of times.
I just can't even believe that her papers were hidden away for 50 years and that nobody really talked about her. So I have to say to myself, was her story kept from us because she's a woman? And then I start to wonder about how many other stories have been kept from us.
So I've seen that documentary any number of times, and every time it gives me chills. I wonder of other people's reactions or thoughts. Just off the top of your head, what your first thoughts or reactions to the video were.
Karen, go ahead.
Can you hear me? I don't know if you can hear me. Great.
Yeah, we can hear you. Great.
I spent about a month in Berlin in 2014, right before this conference took place, and I was doing some research on Jewish feminism in Berlin before and after the war. And so I remember standing in front of her home where that plaque is located with my daughter, who was 9 at the time. And it was a very powerful experience to just walk in the neighborhood where she lived and to know that she was a powerful role model for so many women in the future who will be able to learn about her life. So I'm really glad that JWA has, and that you're doing a lot of this research to get the word out about her life and her work. Thanks.
Thank you. Just want to draw attention to some of the typed comments. Bernice and Karen. Karen, I just want to say I totally agree that it's a really important story for young women to be learning as part of Bat Mitzvah or Rosh Chodesh groups, and that I also think it's a really powerful story to integrate into Community Yom HaShoah, both because we don't often focus on women's stories when we talk about the Holocaust, but also because for me it's an opportunity to talk about something that is tragic but also inspiring and hopeful on Yom HaShoah. Ellen, I'm not sure whether any of the rabbis who were able to attend were renewal. I can check and let you know. And Muriel, I love the idea of creating a story to tell about her. I hope that if you do, you'll share it with us. I'm just going to give a little space for responses. Yes, Karen, Rabbi Sandy Sasso is the author of children's books. Yes, that's the right one. I'm struck by how many people are saying that they were brought to tears or were moved emotionally by the video. That's also the reaction that I have, and I'm still sort of trying to think through like how much of that is sadness because it's a tragic story. It's sadness because of sort of the loss of this incredible potential amidst the loss of so much life in the Holocaust. And some part of it, it's the sadness that I didn't have this role model, that I didn't know about her when I was deciding to become a rabbi. If people would like to share through speaking, please know that that's also an option. And I'm curious to know whether there are sort of questions that were raised for you by this video. And if so, what they were. Jenny, I don't actually know how they first found her papers. My understanding is that after the wall fell, that there was an attempt to sort of save a number of, there was like a whole collection of Jewish archives that had been sort of not well cared for, and a number of historians were able to find those and bring those materials to be more properly archived, but I don't know the details. Karen asked whether this material is available. So, so some pieces of her sermons I'll show at the end are available on our website, and longer pieces of her writings are available in some of the published works about her, and also there in the book that we already mentioned and in other places, some of the interviews about her are available. So I want to just move, some people are already starting, we're educators, right? So people are already starting to think about potentially resources for learning more and for teaching. So I want to show you a little bit of what we have created for you on our website. So let me share my screen with you guys. So if you follow the link that was there and will be in the materials from this, or if you just go to jwa.org/rabbis, you'll see there's a tab called Regina Jonas Remembered. And here we have lots, I won't say everything you would want because there's so much to want to know, but almost everything you could possibly want in terms of resources for learning more and teaching about Regina. So first of all, the film that you just watched is available here and free, and you're welcome to show it. Not only welcome, we encourage you to show it to anyone and everyone and get the word out about this important figure. We have here a collections of writings from the participants on the trip and their reflections, and also press coverage of the trip. But what I really want to highlight is our program resources. So if you go into our program resources, basically we asked ourselves, you know, it's really important, we really believe it's very important for more people to know about and study about Regina Jonas. And we can't be knocking on every door of every synagogue and every JCC to do it ourselves. So how can we make it as easy as possible to run a session in your community about Regina Jonas? So if you come here, you'll see that we have a link to our Jewish Women's Archive encyclopedia article about Regina, which has tons of information about her life. Almost everything I shared and more will be available as background information for you there. But we also provide a number of activities or sort of lesson plans in a box. So we have a framing activity to sort of get the conversation going. We have the film screening, which will give you all the language you would need to introduce a film screening of the documentary, and then a whole number of different suggestions of follow-up questions that you could use for a discussion, an extension activity which begins some of the work that you guys were asking about of connecting between Regina and some of her inheritors, learning about Rabbi Sasso and Rabbi Grimberg and Sarah Horowitz and some of those who have followed in her footsteps. We also offer, if you would choose to do a program about Regina or speak about her near her yort site, which is Parshat Bereshit at the beginning of the Jewish year. So we offer a number of different suggestions for connecting her story to that Parsha and to the fall holidays. Obviously, it's also a very strong connection to speak about her for Yom HaShoah. And we also provide a ritual if you'd like to do a memorial ritual for Regina in your communities. So I hope that you will see all of these options and feel and know that you are totally empowered to create a program in your community to teach about Regina. So there's obviously much more to say and to discuss, but I'll just stop talking there and turn it back to you guys to ask, for you personally, do you think that it's important to be teaching or speaking about Regina? And if so, what ideas might you have for where you might do that? Some people already a little bit started in this direction, but other thoughts of how you might want to teach about Regina, and if so, how we at JWA can support you. Ellen points out that this is a great thing to teach about during Women's History Month. I so agree with that, Ellen. Obviously, at JWA, we think that every month should be Women's History Month, and we also think that there's so much to be talking about during Women's History Month, but I do think this is an especially good story for thinking about how women's history is lost and why it's so important to do the work of highlighting and advancing women's stories that Women's History Month is all about. Karen, I think you said it beautifully. She's just such a model of strength. I know I wouldn't have had the strength to keep going in the ways that she did, and such a model of living in a meaningful and purposeful and in a beautiful service, even during the most challenging times. Muriel is saying, I think, a really important point, which is, when each of the movements debated whether or not women could become rabbis, first being permitted in the Reform and Reconstructionist, and then later the debates at JTS, which you remember taking part in. It would have been really powerful to be able to say, well, of course women can be rabbis. Look, like this woman was already ordained by these really prominent rabbis. And so that's another consequence of the fact that her stories were lost. We weren't able to use her as evidence for our own ability to do this work. Wow. Okay, so we have some real experts in the room. Karen, I'm so blown away that teaching about Regina in particular is what has inspired you to pursue the rabbinate. I'll again say personally that I didn't have the opportunity of knowing about her when I decided to become a rabbi. But when I discovered her, I just even reading the encyclopedia article about her, I was moved to tears because I felt such a kinship of another woman in this struggle. And Alan apparently is doing did amazing research of women and their experiences of getting doctorates. So I'm not sure technically whether her dissertation earned her a doctorate or whether it was like a dissertation connected to her ordination. But I would love to know more about sort of what was happening for women in that field then. It's a fascinating topic. Other comments or questions before we wrap up? Right, absolutely. Like the fact that she even thought it was possible to become a rabbi with no role model is mind-blowing. And all of her professors were men, all of her colleagues were men. I mean, the strength of character that must have taken is sort of mind-blowing. Karen asked whether the webinar has been recorded. It has been, and we would be very honored for you to share it with your colleagues and anyone else you think would be interested in learning more about Regina Jonas. Yeah, Bernice, you make an excellent point, right? That in addition to the fact that it's amazing that she didn't think her gender was a barrier to entering the rabbinate, that also that she was studying to be a rabbi in the decades that she was, that she was working in Jewish schools at the point in time when Jewish children were no longer welcome in the public schools as the Nuremberg laws were being imposed, and that she still felt called to be Jewish in this incredibly public way. It's really a mind-blowing story. So there's obviously so much more to say, but with that, I'm going to just turn it over to Larissa to take us home.
Thank you, Sarah, so much for being here today and sharing this incredible story with us. I'm really inspired, and it seems like everyone else is too. And I do just want to mention out loud that a recording of this webinar will be available on our site, as well as all of the related materials. I'll hope to get that up shortly after Passover, maybe even during Passover, we'll see. But I'll send an email to everyone when it's up, so you'll know that it's there. Okay, so I just have a few announcements of some things that are happening at JWA. So we have another upcoming online learning program on Thursday, May 18th. Some of you, I think, have participated in our programs with Alicia Jo Ravens before. Alicia is a poet and a musician and also a Jewish educator, and she's developed a curriculum called Girls in Trouble that focuses on women in Bible, and each lesson features a song that she wrote about that particular woman, and asks participants to look at the original text and to look at Alicia's song, and use that woman's story as inspiration and to help us navigate the complexities of our own lives. So in this particular program, we're going to be looking at Lilith. The title is Lilith, Demoness or Heroine. It's very exciting. So again, that will be Thursday, May 18th at 1 p.m. Stay tuned for registration, which should be up pretty soon. And speaking of Girls in Trouble, I also just wanted to mention that now Alicia Jo's full curriculum, so 10 lesson plans, are all available in condensed form on our site. So I would encourage you to check those out, whether you're an educator or just someone who's interested in learning more about biblical women and learning more about biblical women, and also listening to some great music. Something else, we are currently accepting applications for the Twersky Educator Award. This award honors and celebrates educators who use primary sources creatively to integrate Jewish women's stories into their teaching. The application deadline is coming up. It's this Sunday, April 9th, but it's pretty short, so you should have time to do it if you're interested in applying. The application is actually divided into 2 phases. So this is phase 1, and then select applicants are asked to submit a more detailed phase 2 application. So There are some links on this page that you're welcome to click on. You won't get kicked out of the room. If you want to learn more about the award or apply, the winner gets a $2,000 cash prize, and also JWA will come into your community to present the award and also offer a free workshop. So it's a pretty sweet deal. I would definitely recommend applying if you're someone who teaches about Jewish women. We are also accepting applications for our teen leadership program, the Rising Voices Fellowship. This is a program for female-identified Jewish 10th through 12th graders who are interested in writing and passionate about Judaism, feminism, and social justice. So if this describes anyone that you know, please tell them about the Rising Voices Fellowship and encourage them to apply. The deadline, as you can see here, is April 23rd, which is a Sunday. I also want to ask you all to please take a few minutes to fill out a survey and tell us what you thought about this program. Your feedback is extremely important to us. We use it to make our programs better. And again, you can click on this link right now so you can complete the survey as soon as the program is over. I will also email it to you tomorrow as an extra little nudge. But again, we really do appreciate you taking the time to give us some feedback. So with that, I just want to thank everyone for participating again. I want to thank Sarah for such a wonderful program. And I hope everyone has a wonderful Pesach. Thank you.
And I'll just say quickly that if you are planning